And there's been an institutionalization across the board of US norms, and financial institutions in particular, that keep the system more or less together. So I think that whatever rivalry might arise will tend to be marginal. I might be wrong, but I haven't seen any indication that that nationalism will become a runaway phenomenon in the recent crisis. This is a possibility. There is a very substantial political problem, evidently, exactly around this. The US exercises a very tight control over a number of key member countries of OPEC. I've seen some debates within the UN system about that, but there is a kind of a red line around this. You cannot raise this question. And even advisors within UN organizations that argue very reasonably, I think, on solid economic grounds, that Arab states in particular should move away from the dollar. They will not do that. So there's a political arrangement much more than an economic one. But I agree with you that I cannot see this lasting indefinitely. At some point it will have to crack. And China is moving very cautiously, very gradually towards localized alternatives to the dollar. I think this is possibly the way it's going to happen. It's going to crack very slowly. The euro is in no position to replace the dollar. There's no interest replacing the dollar. But alternatives will, in the next decade, alternatives will very likely emerge. And that will mean a problem for the United States, like you said. It's going to be a substantial problem over a long period of time to reabsorb all those dollars internally. It's a problem that Britain went through. You survive these things. It is a shock, but you can survive. But it will come in the context of growing internationalization of the US economy, a loss of US control over sources of accumulation within the United States itself, a loss of control, a gradual loss of control of the levers of economic policy. So, and that is how empires decline. It's usually very gradual, and it cracks, and then it's gradual again, it slides down. How exactly it's going to unfold, we don't know, but it's going to be interesting to watch. The alternative to greed is solidarity, and it is equality. And these are the things that traditionally have pushed the left forward, that have defined the left platform at different levels. How do you convince people that this is viable is a completely different ballgame. And this will rely primarily on experience. I don't think you can convince somebody. You cannot sit down with someone and show them that capitalism is wrong. It depends on their lived experience and their frustrations and aspirations and their attempt to find relatively narrow alternatives that will resolve those problems, and then concluding that this is insufficient. And then you try something a bit broader, and eventually you convince yourself that you need a radical transformation. But it's not going to be, I don't think it's going to be the work of outside activists telling people what the world should look like. That doesn't work. But what does help is for people to realize that when they are worried about alternatives, that there is a group of people out there that have been thinking about these things for some time, that have got some experience, and that can share those experiences. It's not a preaching thing, but it is a cumulative experience thing of a shared vision of the world. And then I think it might be more plausible, it might be easier to kind of channel people together, bring them together, to reflect on how this kind of alternative, however we call it, how it's going to be built. We know it's going to be different from what happened in the Soviet Union. The world is different. We have that experience. We're going to do different next time. How it is going to be structured, it will depend on so many things we can barely imagine. I think Marx was absolutely right when he said he's not going to get involved in the cookshops of the future. Let those people sort out the problem when they build it. That's the only realistic way to face this challenge, I think. It is very difficult to even imagine how this situation is going to unfold in the long term. I find it unbelievable, I find it incredible that you can restore the kind of international situation we had before, with the United States fundamentally getting interest-free loans from the rest of the world, to be able to run current account deficits indefinitely, sucking in production from the rest of the world and paying with the paper that they can print in green. It can last for a long time because the US is hegemonic at so many levels in the world today, and the US has a very large economy, and it's a very solid economy. But this has to crack. But this is the $5 trillion question in the world today. How is it going to crack? How is it, at what point will China or East Asia or the other surplus countries in the world, until when will they accept US dollars in exchange for their products? And is the decline of the United States that will have to happen in this context, is it going to be smooth or is it going to be conflictual? We don't know. We know that this is going to be a long process. The decline of the UK as the paramount power in the world took the best part of a century. So this is not a process that I think, unfortunately, any of us will live to see the end of. But we're going to see very interesting developments in those fields. I don't see it developing, as I had mentioned before, developing in a kind of militaristic scenario, because there's no plausible enemy. Who is the enemy against whom the United States is going to mobilize its forces actually in practice? But I might be wrong. Who knows? Who knows how these things can evolve? In terms of uprisings, I wish I could see some, but we are in a very sterile time from the point of view of the radical left. And there are no clear signals of a return to mass mobilizations. I wish this was wrong. I want to see that happening. I want to see the recovery of imagination and people claiming the right to aspire to a different future. It's not happening at the moment, but I'm fully confident that it will happen at some stage later on, because it is again inconceivable that people will continue to accept all the inequities and the difficulties and the crises and the waste and the injustice and the exploitation that we have today. So we keep on working on these things. We keep on trying to pass a message, and at some point it will happen. It will probably happen and evolve in a way that we cannot quite predict. It will be different every time. It is different every time. Every wave of mobilization of the left is different in character and in form, and it involves different social groups. We'll wait and see. We will see which groups respond, which groups invent tactics and modalities of resistance that can be successful. I think at this point in time, we're exploring alternatives. You kind of watch around the world and you see who is being successful, who's being able to do something different and interesting and successful. How do you succeed against a modality of capital accumulation that is globalized, financialized, and so on? How can we invent something? And it's a process of discovery. It has happened in the past. It happened in the late 19th century. It happened again in the 1960s, for example. It will happen again. Well, we just have to be alert and keep on doing the good work and hoping that we'll be around when it happens. And I'm going to finish on this. The left has been at the margins for a very, very long time, and it is time to return to the center stage. Because the left brings together the demands and the aspirations of the vast majority of people around the world. The left has led the most important transformative struggles in modern history. Struggles for the limitation of the working day, for public health and public education, for citizenship rights to everyone, for the extension of democracy, and so on. And you should be proud of that. We should be proud of the fact that every success in these areas and in many other areas has been achieved only because of the tireless work, the selfless work of left-wing activists around the world, very often at the highest personal cost. And we need to reclaim this tradition and build on it in the struggles of today. Thank you very much.